Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, college football fans across the nation and around the world. This is the Tim May podcast. And if you can't get fired up about the game we're going to talk about in a moment, you can't get fired up. You are wet coals. Once again, joining me in the cockpit of this magnificent flying machine is Bill Bender, one of the great co-pilots I've ever had the privilege to fly with. Bill Bender of the Sporting News. Welcome back to the Tim May podcast, my man.
Hey, Tim, how you doing, man? Thanks for having me on.
I'm pretty fired up. I'm pretty jacked up. People who know me know I'm have always been a tremendous college football fan. In fact, I used to kind of go into depression as I look back on it clinically now, way back when I was a kid and a young adult when the college football season was over. Even with the NFL, I watched, I like the NFL. I grew up like you. I was a big Green Bay Packers fan way back when, grew up in Alabama because their quarterback was from Alabama, Bart Starr, which predates you. But I digress. Bottom line is I love college football. And now you and I, right here in our own backyard, we've got one of the game of games of the season, definitely staring us in the face. Unbeaten Michigan visiting unbeaten Ohio State. Number 2, number 3 in the college football rankings, playoff rankings. Ohio State number 2, Michigan number 3. At least we think it'll hold that way in the new rankings this week because we're video taping this before those come out. My point is I'm stammering because this is the game of the century 2. The first one was in 2006. Now here we are again, 2 unbeatens. That was 1 versus 2. This is 2 versus 3. Bill, are you jacked up?
Oh, you should be. You have to be. I mean, it's I think where this game sits is somewhere between that 2006 matchup and then what we watched in 2016, the double overtime thriller. I think will produce something in that neighborhood too. It's so interesting. You struck me with something last time we talked where this is the regular season matchup. It has to mean something. This may be the last time that it means everything in terms of when the Big Ten adds USC and UCLA, Michigan and Ohio State may play in the Big Ten championship 7 days later. They may play in the 12-team playoff. They're going to play more often. And that's the story I did for Sporting News after we talked about it. I talked to Urban about it, talked to Tressel about it, and Coach Tressel and Jake Butt and a few others, and we'll be running that at Sporting News where to me, it doesn't sit completely right that, this game has to have the consequences. And this may be the last time that it has these kind of consequences with these records.
Yeah. And like I told you last time we talked, if you're sitting in the Big Ten West right now and you're the athletic director or president, why would you vote to go no divisions? Why would you do that? Why would you take away any last shot, your school might have of playing for the Big Ten championship? Regardless of how good or bad you are. And there have been some good Big Ten championship games. There have been some snoozers too. But why would you say yes to that?
Right, I wouldn't. And Urban, Coach Meyer had some great thoughts both ways. So
yes.
he talked about okay, how impossible it would be to get ready for Michigan twice in 7 days, but he saw the value of
TV.
Getting the opportunity to win a Big Ten championship as the second best team or a rematch. But he also said once you do it this way and you eliminate divisions, there are 6 or 7 schools that will never play in this game.
Right.
And he's right. Like in Indiana, never playing in this. Half of these, how many Big Ten West schools have played in the Big Ten championship game? Right. Most of them have. Yeah. More than not. So
Northwestern's played in it, go ahead.
Yeah, Northwestern made it. Iowa's made it. I think Illinois and Purdue haven't, but
Nebraska has though.
Yeah, Nebraska has. So
Minnesota hasn't. But yeah,
4 of them then.
Well, the point. We don't need to get bogged. Right. Yeah, we don't need to get bogged down on that. Only from the standpoint of it would take me a while to go through those games, But but the point is most of these will have no shot of getting there because it does look like the big 2 are back. And if the other 2 come along, especially one of those, USC comes along, and man, was that a game on Saturday night, USC and UCLA. I think one team just scored again. But
right.
It just puts a shadow. Penn State's in there throwing punches for sure. But it just puts a shadow on the rest of the conference. Why would you, except for making a big time TV attraction? Because when Urban and I talked about it on Urban's Take a couple of weeks ago, that's what's going to drive it, is the fact that, Fox, for example, they'd rather have Ohio State, Michigan 2 than they would Ohio State, Illinois, or Michigan, Minnesota or something. I mean, you understand the attraction from a TV ranking standpoint, but man, if you go into this game on Saturday knowing you're going to have another shot next week, and both of these teams would know that right now, if it was like a no division format, Ohio State and Michigan would know that no matter what happens Saturday, they're going to have another shot, the next week. It kind of changes everything, right?
Tim, if that happened, think about how many guys are hurt coming into this game.
Yes.
Whether it's Blake Corum or Donovan Edwards or Mike Morris or Matt Williams or Tommy Eichenberg.
Yeah.
They would sit those guys Saturday.
Yeah.
And I think they would. I think they would sit them and then play them the next week in Indianapolis if they could.
Yeah.
And that's just part of it. This is the game, this rivalry and everything that comes with it is part of the casualty of going to 12 teams and doing the things that they're going to do, is that, yes, these teams are going to play more often. And Tressel and Myers said, you're going to have to adapt to it. And, but, as the traditionalists that we are, and Coach Meyer obviously is a huge traditionalist like us, that's hard to fathom sometimes, because it will take, I think, whether we like it or not, it's going to take a little bit away from this regular season game.
Yeah. And by the way, speaking of this regular season game, I've got my buddy Matt Wilhelm, who's played in quite a few of these, was there when the worm turned in this series back in 2001 and 2002, when Ohio State won the national championship the year after it finally beat Michigan again in 2001, as Jim Tressel basically said, the fans would be proud of that team on that day when he took the job in 2001. I've got him on to just talk about playing in this game and talk about Ohio State and Michigan and how they kind of match up and what he sees coming. We've got that sandwiched in between two portions of Tim May and Bill Bender. But let's get back to real quickly before we move on to that, Bill. This game is the stakes could not be higher, right? I mean, the winner moves on to the Big Ten championship game. As Jim Harbaugh said on his press conference this week, leading up to the game, you want to be a part of this, and he thinks his team is ready for this challenge. You want to measure yourself against the best, and that goes for both of these teams, right? And that just adds to what's coming. What happened last year just adds to the feeling you have going into this one, right?
Oh, I mean, it's been a decade since Ohio State went into this game coming off a loss. So
a loss the previous year. Yeah.
Yeah, the loss the previous not the previous week, but the previous year.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, I mean, Ohio State hasn't had the revenge factor or whatever you want to call it, the 365 days of hearing about it factor, which, CJ Stroud talked about after the loss to Maryland.
After the win at Maryland. You said the CJ Stroud talked about after the loss at Maryland. They
better not have lost.
It just felt
wow.
Yeah.
Well, no, yeah. Let me make clear they did not lose to Maryland.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, exactly. And Michigan, for their end, they haven't won at Ohio Stadium. I throw this out all the time. They haven't won there since 2000.
Yes.
Since Drew Henson was quarterback. The end of that, and it's funny you're talking to Matt, because that was part of that run where Michigan kind of dominated this series. And ever since, 9 straight losses at the shoe, some worse than others, some more memorable than others, but the pressure's on the Wolverines to do that. And I think, Tim, the most interesting thing to me is these two teams are built to beat each other.
Yeah.
It's like Ohio State is built to do the things that Michigan can't do, and Michigan is built to do the things that Ohio State can't do, and or needs to, weaknesses. It's a very intriguing on the field matchup, and those tend to favor the offense, in my opinion. The high powered offense tends to win those games, but they do it in different fashions.
Yeah. In this bonus round of Tim May podcast, I had John U. Bacon on earlier this week talking about that very thing. I mean, in the mid 70s, when it was Bo versus Woody. I mean, those two teams were built almost exactly alike. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it was like watching sumo wrestlers go at each other. This is different. These two teams are very different in the way they've gone about structuring their teams, their approach to games, and yet, you know, they're both designed to gain an edge, right? I mean, on the other, and which is interesting, and they're not afraid to flaunt what they do best. And I just think it's amazing because it is so hard. So we found out this weekend, Bill, to get to 11-0 now anywhere, no matter what league you're in. It is so difficult. You saw it this past weekend. Georgia beats Kentucky by 10 points, 16-6, I think it was. Ohio State has its challenge at Maryland. 43-30, they win that game, but you got to remember they scored a touchdown with 9 seconds left on a strip sack, fumble recovery. And then, of course, Michigan was losing to Illinois. They were losing at home to Illinois before Jake Moody hit his 4th field goal of the day to win it with 9 seconds left. We saw TCU have to win the game on the last play with a field goal against Baylor, the defending Big 12 champion Baylor. Then we saw Tennessee, the best one-loss team out there, right? Decimated by Spencer Rattler in South Carolina. So just when you think you got a handle of what's gonna happen, what's coming, stuff happens, right? This season, it's been in its own way as wacky as any college football season I can remember.
No, they're 18 to 22-year-olds. I mean,
Yes.
That's my answer. I mean, you and I have watched these games for years. I mean, so when it happens, it doesn't surprise me. I did kind of chuckle that it went from TCU. The way that they won was actually impressive, you know, to be able to kick that field goal and do what they did. Michigan and Ohio State clearly were looking ahead. Now, Ohio State did not lose to Maryland, but they did look ahead, and Michigan looked ahead, I think, on some level.
I think that's an easy excuse, but go ahead.
Okay. Well, tell me why. I mean,
I think Illinois, Michigan was a collision like Woody and Bo. It was like-minded teams going at each other, and then Michigan loses its Heisman Trophy candidate Blake Corum halfway through that game. He came back in the second half and tried to play a little bit, and then they took him out for good, and they're still trailing. You know, or they end up trailing in that game in the 4th quarter. Maryland, Ohio State was a classic example of a team with nothing to lose, just saying to hell with it and throwing the ball. I mean, and until it sticks. And that's what Talia Tagovailoa did. And it kept, you know, they hit a couple of big plays, which basically made that a contest in the 4th quarter. And why not? And they've got skill position. I keep reminding people, Maryland, with the exception of Michigan, Illinois, Maryland gave Michigan its best game so far this year. And Maryland just did, in my opinion, the same thing to Ohio State, even though, of course, the Penn State game was Ohio State was losing in the 4th quarter and came back with a flourish to win that game. And, of course, they won in the second half against Notre Dame. But Maryland gave Ohio State all it could handle. There may be a little bit, but, you know, you got the revolving door situation in Ohio State at the running back spot. But Dallin Hayden was exactly the tonic. I don't know if you agree or not, but he went in there and hit the holes, man. And so I think Ohio State found something in the midst of that game. But I just can't, you know, I understand you can be distracted, but looking ahead is a different, you know, and who knows what even that means, right?
Well, that's fair. I mean, but you know, that again, 18 to 22-year-olds, that maybe their focus was off a little bit. I think the Michigan game certainly turned with Blake Corum's injury, not just because he was injured, but they rolled it a fumble, which he fumbled, and it took points off the board. It allowed Illinois played well in the 3rd quarter. Ohio State, like you said, they found something in the running game. I still, you know, I like where they're at, and Michigan's not going to come in there and throw it 40 times with JJ McCarthy. They would prefer probably to be around like 20 to 25 and see if they can run the ball. And I think that's actually good news for Ohio State, because up front, this is the challenge. You know, this is what they've heard all offseason. This is that, you know, Michigan did this, that, and everything else to them last year, which they did. And now it's their turn to respond. Dallin Hayden could be a really key player in this game. Yeah. You know, if Travion's still banged up, if Mayan can't go, you know, here's something I was talking about earlier today, not to go on too about it, but the thing about this game that I love is you and I could talk and you say a name and you know what year it happened. You know what I mean? Like you
Yeah.
could be like Anthony Gonzalez. You're like 2005 corner of the big house makes the big catch. And I'm wondering which guy is good. Last year, it was probably Hassan Haskins or Hutchison. Who's it going to be this year that puts their signature on this game? And that's the beauty of it. I don't have easy answers. I mean, it's like Stroud, Harrison, but Dallin Hayden could be that guy.
Yeah. Hey, man, that's a great segue. Let's go to my conversation with Matt Wilhelm, because I bring up pretty much that same kind of idea, in this game. And like he said, it comes down to making plays, somebody making a play. I mean, the classic Ohio State Michigan games is somebody sometimes you've hardly even heard of who steps up at that critical moment and makes a play, whether it's on offense, defense, or special teams, sometimes all three. But let's get to my conversation with Matt Wilhelm, who's been in the game, who understood what it was like to get beat in the game, and understood what it was like to see that worm turn and Ohio State take control of this series. Ladies and gentlemen, here's another conversation with one of my favorite people, Matt Wilhelm. And as promised, ladies and gentlemen, a return to command performance by Matt Wilhelm, and who better to have on the Tim May podcast, the week of the game, than a guy that was there in 2001 and was part of the renaissance, as they say in England, of Ohio State's fortunes in the game. Ohio State goes to Michigan in 2001, wins the game. As Jim Trussell said, you'd be proud of them when in the classroom, on the field, and especially that day in Ann Arbor, and it happened. Then they come back and win again in 2022 and go on to win a national championship. But the bottom line is, Matt, Ohio State's only lost 3 times since that 2001 game. You guys set the standard back then, right? And here we are again, the week of the game. And I don't know, where are your thoughts right now, my brother?
It's an exciting week, and I think it's and of course there across the country there are probably other universities that claim that their rivalry is as good as ours or better. But being an Ohio boy playing at Ohio State, it's a very important week. And I know that there are claims out there based around certain articles or perspectives that this is a bigger game for Michigan because of the margin for error, where people think that, Ohio State could potentially backdoor themselves, into the college football playoff. But you and I both know, being around the program as much as we were with, who we are and what we did, while going 0-9, 0-10, 0-11, and 1-0 against Michigan in a certain season, that prior result isn't what we're after, but winning this one at the end is what matters. And once again, here we are in back-to-back years where, both teams are inside the top 10, inside the top 5, both have a lot at stake.
Oh, wait a minute, inside the top 3. Now go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, actually, right. Yeah. I just wanted to make sure my bases were covered. Inside the top 3. And it's and we enter this game, and I think you look at, the way that Ohio State's been winning football games, and you look at the way that, Michigan's been winning football games. And then truthfully, this was my first opportunity because, Michigan, Illinois was at noon and then goes right into Ohio State, Maryland, right?
Yeah.
So it was my first opportunity to see, Michigan for a full game. Otherwise, I'm clicking between, other games and it. And you see you saw what I think I've seen multiple times when Michigan's been on TV. It's like there's a feel it out period, in the first half where Maryland was close with Michigan and Penn State was close with Michigan, and then they go in at halftime and they recalibrate offensively and defensively, really tighten things up, on that opponent's offense, and then they're dedicated to running the football, using that and the play action game to not really have McCarthy make a bunch of mistakes.
Yeah.
And so they play it very safe. They play great defense and they run the football. And in some cases, that's what Urban Meyer liked to do, and we aired it out, when we had to, but we wanted to run the football. And I think that's the one thing, coming into this game that I think will be emphasized to the nth degree is our ability to run the football, which has kind of struggled as of late. And a lot of that has to do with, the inconsistencies on what running back's going to be available for Ohio State. Mayan Williams, Travion Henderson, and the Dallin Hayden kid, that did, a great job. I think it's a little bit bigger than who's running the football. I think it's the offensive line has they've been getting some great efforts. And I think in many cases, you think you can just roll your helmet out there and teams are just going to lay down for you. They want to slay the dragon too. And then on the flip side, you look at what Michigan does, and they're, as good. I wouldn't say any better than they were last year, but they don't have the dominant names in Aiden Hutchinson or the what's the other kid that the Ravens took on the other side?
I can't ever pronounce his name correctly.
Ajabo. Ajabo. Those two guys were, got all the hype coming into the game, and two defensive tackles that, rename nameless to just do their job and take a bunch of double teams. But they were dominant up front last year, and these guys are as good. They just don't have the names. And then their ability to run the football, and I thought last year coming out of our loss, it was the first time that I believe that Michigan football on the field portrayed the Harbaugh mentality of what he's always wanted to do there, which is play great defense, run the football, throw it strategically, throw it off of play action, which behooves, any number of these quarterbacks that they keep cycling out there each and every year.
Yeah. Shorten the game, basically. Ball control, shorten the game, and then play great defense. Make the other team feel a little bit desperate every time it gets the ball, a little more desperate.
But I think also just to put a exclamation point is both teams got challenged this week, and rightfully so. I mean, the Big Ten in my eyes is down. You've got Penn State, who I don't think is great. You've got Ohio State, Michigan, and then there's a significant fall off. Michigan State's not Michigan State. Wisconsin's not Wisconsin. Illinois was a big surprise. But I think they're great. And you look at who they are. They want to run the football and they want to play great defense.
Yeah.
So they're taking on the characteristics of their head football coach. But otherwise, Maryland was flashy early in the season, with Tua's brother. He made some plays with his legs and with his arms against us. But ultimately, it's the mindset of Ryan Day has been survive and move on. And we've done so thus far to create this opportunity.
Yeah. It's interesting because, when you really look back on it, except for Illinois, the team that gave Michigan its toughest test this year was Maryland. And and
it was a 3-quarter game, right?
Yeah.
Wasn't it? I thought it was a 3-quarter game. Yeah.
Oh no, it was 3. It was in the fourth quarter. It was in doubt.
Was it?
Yeah. Okay. And that's with Maryland fumbling the opening kickoff and Michigan getting a cheapie right off the bat. And Maryland was kind of banged up the last several weeks. And of course they played in inclement weather the previous 2 weeks before they played Ohio State. It was 30-0 at Penn State, and you're just right off Maryland. But Maryland's got some nice skill position players.
They do.
And they've got a quarterback that when he's feeling fairly healthy, Talia Tungavaloa, as you pointed out, to his little brother, can put the ball on the money, man. And you put those combos together. I mean, they were in doubt, so they aired it out. That's my famous line, and I'm sure other people use it too. But you have nothing to lose. Why not just throw the ball against Ohio State? This is a totally different dynamic going into Saturday because you've got a Michigan team that, man, just does not. They do not impress you throwing the ball, and yet when they had to have some completions to keep drives alive the other day, they got. It's by hook or crook. Going up and down the field, which drives you crazy if you're a defense or a defensive coordinator. But hey, whatever gets the job done, right?
It is. It really is. And again, watching that game, I can say after not watching them a lot the whole season, when we dig into film study, and I say we, meaning the Ohio State coaches and the players, and to put a plan together, I think from a passing game standpoint, Michigan is not very flashy. They're not overly creative. They execute very well, which puts stress on a defense, because of eye control and discipline and, defensive technique and footwork and so on. And like you said, multiple times, they, motion a guy outside the end to get in a stack, and then he'd shoot right back to the flat and you'd get the 5 yards he needed, on 3rd and 5 to move the drive on. Then they go run, pass. Right. Yeah. But I think what I'm very interested to see from Jim Knowles and this defense, because Michigan's going to go, 2 tight ends, even 3 tight ends. They're going to go 13 personnel, 1 wide receiver, 3 tight ends, and a running back. They're going to go 22. That's 2 tight ends, 2 running backs. They're going to pack it in, and they're going to go, we're going to get up on the ball and push you. And then there's going to be the cross action by the backs, some type of zone read or power concept, whatever it might be. And we're we're going to get pushed at the point of attack, and then we're going to have our Heisman hopeful running behind a lead blocker, and you're going to have to fit this up and stop it.
Yeah.
And I think what we really haven't seen, I'll say down in, down out all year from Jim Knowles is because, we get teams behind the sticks that plays right into our hands, that plays right into the creativity of that 3-3-5 defense. Is now you got these boys, who've been great athletes all year along our defensive line, JTT and Sawyer and Hall and
Zach Harrison
Zach Harrison. And now these boys got to play, big, bad, old school bully Big Ten football. And I'm not trying to say in any way, shape, or form, we're not tough enough, we're not good enough, we don't have the horses. No, we do. It's just going to be a completely different game that they've played all season long. They might have gotten in the situation, here and there, 3rd and 1, 3rd and short, 4th and 1 on a stop where a team wants to pack it in and try to run the football. But this is going to be down in, down out, and they're going to motion those tight ends to create leverage and, our ability to track it, formation, recognize, all of this and fit. And so I think what Knowles wants to do we see a lot of, Simon coming in with 3 linebackers? Do we see safeties rolled down, Latham, Ransom, rolled down into the box?
Yeah.
I don't know because, and I think what's great about this is if we look at the way Michigan, I don't say dominated, beat us last year, it's a great piece of tape for Knowles to study because they're not going to be all that different. Will they have different wrinkles? Will they have new players? Sure. Will they have new shifts and motions and actions off of, but the core of who they are and what they do is no different from last year than it is this year.
Yeah.
So, and I think, I know there's been some turnover on the from a coaching standpoint, there at Michigan, which is going to change the personality of it. But again, they're going to want their big physical offensive line to get off on you and push you and create lanes for their Heisman hopeful. And last year's failures, you hope, will be identified. I think you've got, I'll just say to talk us up in no way, shape, or form last year. You got to say Tommy Eichenberg and that last year's game versus this year's game it's not night and day, but he is significantly improved.
Yes.
And, and our hopes are, and because they're, Knowles has put him in a situation to maximize his skill set. I can identify the fact that Knowles and, who's the linebacker coach as well, and Tommy are watching a boatload of film because of his ability to diagnose things. Like last year, it was a delay. This year, he is running downhill, making plays. Now he still has to make them, right? Which he's made a boatload, and he's missed a couple of here and there, but we're all human. But I think the improvement by him alone is, and everyone else, that participated in last year's game, should be enough of a motivation, along with all the other stuff that's at stake, for us to be up for that battle.
When you're a football player and you're part of a team, you're part of a defense, and basically, as Josh Gaddis, their offensive coordinator, who's no longer there, he's at Miami, Florida now. But when after the game, you hear not questioned, basically doubted Ohio State's toughness and physicality. What is it? Where does that sit, as a player? Where does it? Because I thought scheme-wise, Ohio State, as Steel Chambers described the other day, things were cloudy a lot of times for them, just on calls, on guys getting lined up correctly, on not feeling confident about the call that was made before a play started. I'm talking about defensively. And then
which is insane, which is crazy that you're 12 weeks into a season and you're still in the biggest game of your season and you're still like uncertain on what you need to do.
But then afterwards, you're basically, for one of another term, you're called soft, you're called not tough enough, etc. What does that do, Matt, for a defensive player? Where does that go in the motivational file, I guess?
Oh, it should be, you definitely file it away. I'm sure Mickey Marotti beat these kids over the head with it the entire offseason. And
Ryan Day. And
Ryan, absolutely. And I think that when I say, one coach, it's the extension of the head football coach. And I think you file that away, and it was, used and abused. There might have been, I don't know this to be true, T-shirts made, either worn by the players or worn by the coaches to kind of, convey this messaging and keep it, at the forefront of their mind, because it's not something you can say in some case, some programs. And I think that the greatest thing that said by Ryan Day was, you go 11-2 and win the Rose Bowl.
And it's not
and
good
you
enough.
consider you consider your season a disappointment, because
failure.
that's not what we expected. Failure, what we expected Ohio State. So all of those things are motivation all off season long. But then when you actually get to, your season starts, and especially the way that we did against, at that time, a ranked opponent who's working their way back in our favor, this Notre Dame team who's got a big win against USC this week. And what was at stake in that game? And we start, chipping away at, these opponents. It's integrated, but I think more so than anything, because when I'm out in public, it's like I represent me, Matt Wilhelm, the Wilhelm name I represent, and everything else that I was ever a part of. That's my Buckeye career. That's my professional career. It's all those things. And I think when all of these guys, that was a shot not just at this team, that was a shot at the university. That's a shot at the head football coach, and his coaches, and the mindset, that they approach each and every week on what they think they can go out and do and the way in which they play.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And personally, there's not a whole lot wrong with that approach, except for everything goes away and everything changes when it's this game, so, and I think it's been a redundant message that has been on Ryan Day's mind, especially as we've inched closer. It's, win and move on, win and move on, weave and move on. And it's like, it's almost as if there's a messaging. And again, this is completely speculation. It's almost as if there's a personal message between player and coaches, or coaches and players, about arriving in this moment that's this week undefeated, regardless of like what Michigan has done, that they're number 3 or they're number 30 or number 300 in the country, doesn't matter. But they've arrived at this moment with a lot on the line, and all of these boys have been battle tested through the embarrassment of those comments. It being, it's who they're identified as, right? Yeah. And until you go out and prove anything different, so you beat Maryland and you beat Northwestern and you beat, all these teams that you should beat the way that Ohio State, recruits and with the talent and with the coaching, you should. But until you go, into this game and prove it, nothing's changed. And I think that is the message that I would have as a former player to current players. It's the message that I would have as a former player to the coaches. And it should be taken personal. Go ahead. No, go ahead.
How do you define toughness of a football? How do you define toughness of a football player, toughness of a football team? How would you?
I think it's a brand. It's a brand. And I think, for the sake of how, Michigan plays football now, and I'll say start of last season until right now, I think that's become the brand of football that Michigan plays, right?
Yes.
Tough, hard-nosed, run, great defense, shrink the game, all those things. And I can, in some cases, you can look at it. It's not that we don't do it from a toughness standpoint, but like you look at the way that we play with a 3-3-5 and, and how much we spread it out on offense and sling the ball around with a Heisman Trophy quarterback, you can consider what we do as a little bit of basketball on grass. So when you look at the two perspective, it's not that we don't do it in a tough way. It's not that we're not flying around on defense as silver bullets, which we did not do last year, which we have done this year. Yeah. It's not that the one thing that minutely scares me about that whole mindset is like, I don't know if we can run the ball and get 2 yards when we need 2 yards, which I thought with JT Barrett, we could with quarterback power. I think and those running backs and those offensive lines, I guess quarterback power wasn't really a thing with Dwayne Haskins. Quarterback power was a thing with Justin Fields, his legs.
Yeah.
And that asset of his skill set, along with killing you with his arm and his mind, he could take off and run and get you those yards and those tough yards as a 6'4", 230-pound quarterback, right?
Yeah.
And now you have similar, attributes of CJ Stroud, but it's a mentality. I just don't know. And I think that's what scares me most is this game always comes down to probably 3 big plays.
Yeah.
one made by the offense, one made by the defense, and one made by the special teams, or two by one phase and one by the other. And I can't, and again, it's not that I'm not confident. I just go, when it's 4th and 1 and we need to go get that yard, can this offensive line and these running backs go get that yard?
Yeah.
And that by itself calls into question why we all, as outsiders, and can assume until you go do that, you're still perceived as soft.
Were you? I was impressed by Dallin Hayden going in there. He's played obviously quite a bit this year. He played quite a bit against Indiana when he spelled Mayan Williams, who got banged up, and then of course he took, and the running game took a turn for the better once he got in the game the other day, because basically he wasn't trying to dance. Like he said, he's not a dancer. He wasn't trying to dance out there. I mean, whatever's going on with Travion Henderson, he did catch that ball in the flat and turn it into a touchdown. Travion did, but man, it was lackluster when it came to running the ball. But
yeah,
and there were plays that were blocked that if he hadn't danced outside, who knows where they'd go. But Dallin Hayden went in there, and I asked him after the game, I said, were you told to go in there and just hit the point of attack, hit the hole? And it wasn't so much in those words, but that was the message that was portrayed to him, and he did. And I thought excelled. Did you see a little spark there? Have you seen a little spark there from him the last couple of weeks? It makes you feel better, I guess, about the run game.
I have, and I think yes, I absolutely have seen the spark. I think the experience that you just talked about with the number of snaps that he's gotten, in recent weeks, is that's continued to grow because of the some of the nagging injuries. The other two guys is only makes, I'll say, the Ohio State and their staff, Dallin Hayden, and us as fans, tuning into the game, so much more comfortable with him. If it ends up being him, is his ability to, to get those yards and basically, I guess, live up to what Mayan and Travion have meant the last 2 years. I think Dallin Hayden, he's actually like a blend of the two.
Yes.
Because Mayan Williams is very decisive, as a runner, but, he bounces when there's nothing there, he'll bounce, and he's got the lower half to get outside and bounce it and turn something from nothing into something. And I think, but Dallin Hayden's also, he's got the twitch that Travion Henderson has. Well, first of all, if you're a running back, you don't end up at Ohio State because you don't have these attributes, right?
Right.
So we know he can do it. He's just got two great players in front of him. But I do believe that the reason why we saw a very, very decisive Dallin Hayden is because he doesn't have this massive amount of experience or hasn't taken a boatload of snaps, that he wants to be, and this is the way my mindset was, I want to be a good soldier. I want to run where they block it. I don't want to start seeing ghosts and going, oh, front side where the ball's supposed to go is not there. It's not there, not yet, Dallin. So I'm gonna try to cut this thing back out the back door, and I'm gonna go, try to get my yards that way. And then the defense just corrals, and you go for no gain, 1 yard gain, -2, right? Yeah. Whereas Tony Alfred would show you, Dallin, if you're patient. Watch this double team block come off and get up on that backer. You see that seam? That's the seam front side that we're trying to get. And you bailed on it because the picture wasn't very clear. So in some cases, he just needs to go where the plays are meant to be blocked. And again, the defense has paid money to stop you, but the defense, is trying to stop you as well. But sometimes pouring it in there, getting 4 and having 2nd and 6, and not try to, cut back or bounce and go for a negative 1 yard to put you in 2nd 11. Again, I know offense as much as I know defense, but like Ryan Day can call his entire offense in 2nd and 6.
Yeah.
And Ryan Day's got to be a little strategic at 2nd and 11 to get now to 3rd and 5, to have a winnable 3rd down, conversion, as opposed to being, have to throw the ball 2nd and 11. Incompletion puts you 3rd and 11, Not saying we don't have the skill set to go get those yards, but when you really plot out how the offense would go, 3 or 4 yards on 1st down. And I know for Buckeye fans, because we've had running backs for 15 years now, average 8 yards a carry, you expect everything to get you 8 yards.
Yeah.
Not in this game.
Yeah.
Having 2nd and 7 and eliminating, and this is, again, in a nutshell, what this game's going to come down to is tackling from our defense to them, and I'll say their defense to us, and winning in the trenches.
Yeah.
Whatever team wins in the trenches, blocking and tackling, yeah. I'm talking like Woody Hayes and Bo Schembechler right now, right?
Yeah,
it's like blocking and tackling. The team that blocks and tackles the best, it's not going to be Stroud dropping back and not getting sacked. It's not, I mean, does he need protection? Sure. That's the blocking aspect, right? It's getting the ball to Agukpa on a crossing route and him getting tackled for no gain, or he's going to get 15 yards after the catch. That's the blocking, tackling aspect that, as you dig into these two schemes on what's really going to matter, so that's what it's going to be. But I think to go back to your point, Dallin Hayden is so wet behind the ears that he just goes where the ball is supposed to go. And I hope that he doesn't try to get too cute, because I think that's what happens to running. Good running backs eventually try to get cute, and they just want to think like, oh, I'm so talented. We're so talented. I can take this ball wherever I want to. Like, I really do have a steering wheel, as opposed to in this game, when yards are at a premium, pour it in there and get 4, because of what the domino effect of having a 2nd and 6 and not 2nd and 10 means to Ryan Day and the rest of the offense.
Yeah. Follow the railroad tracks. That's the way I look at it. I mean,
yes.
And then here's the thing about Dallin. The last, you could see it develop. He's gotten some pretty extensive playing time the last 2 weeks for sure. And then because I asked him last week, you up for 15 to 20 carries if they need it, and he goes, yeah, whatever my coach needs. And that was going in toward that game. With Mayan Williams getting left behind because of that sprained ankle, there's a good chance he comes back this week. But the thing about that you see in running back sometimes, if you watch closely, they do develop that patience to let the play develop, even if it's just that slight hesitation that lets that guard get on out there, you know what I mean, or that tackle get on out there to form that little seam. And I think you saw that from Dallin Hayden this past week for sure. Meanwhile, you saw from Travion more of an idea of, I've got to hit a home run.
And so that's the 100%, and I think, because they start pressing.
Yeah.
They start pressing, because for gosh sakes, CJ Stroud had, probably the highest odds for the Heisman Trophy. And Travion was, a top 10 Heisman because of what he did as a freshman last year, and him, coming back healthy in this offense, what they thought he was capable of. And then, you start to read your own headlines. You've got name, image, and likeness people writing you checks, telling you the greatest thing since sliced bread, and you can't even get on the field because you're hurt. And then you feel like, I got to make this impact, right?
Yes.
And you break trend, and you press, and you try to, again, I say it starts seeing ghosts. You start seeing things that aren't even there. You start doing things out of character, and it ends up like affecting the football team, but here in a best scenario, and I don't know anything about the health of the two and who we're going to have available, who we're not. But I think because I said Hayden's a little bit of both. Travion's your home run hitter. Mayan's your workhorse, 8 yards I'll say 8 yards in a cloud of dust guy. And Dallin Hayden's somewhere in between, wet behind his ears. I would say if I'm going all in as Ohio State, I work my tail off to get all 3 of these boys up and ready. And I have a plan for all of that. If Travion, maybe it's screens out of the backfield of Travion, blooding your nose with Mayan, and Dallin Hayden becomes your, fit in between type of guy who's much more of the straight line runner, who's much more of, the good soldier, taking the football where he goes, getting us those tough yards along with Mayan, but that's a best case scenario. And I think what's great about all 3 of these, and I've seen this firsthand, going to the Wisconsin game with my son, and then also the Indiana game with my son, and sitting like right there behind the benches. The receivers and running backs don't care who has the success, which is very rare, which kind of goes to show, coming out of, the failure that was losing to Michigan, and, new recruits, new personalities coming in, and, name, image, and likeness. I'm sorry, the transfer portal changes everything, guys leave, guys come in, blah, blah, blah. They come from all different directions now, not just through a high school program. Is being down there. There's a boatload of communication about what's good enough and what's going well amongst the players and coaches. And then when just how players interact with each other. And you can't really see it on TV much, unless the camera traces them to the sideline. But out of those 3 backs, or Travion and Mayan, when, really wasn't Hayden, at least not yet, they don't care who gets the accolades. They don't care who scores the touchdowns. They don't care who goes. If Travion goes for 150 and Mayan goes for 50, they're both celebrating. If Mayan goes for, 4 touchdowns and $165 like he had, midseason, and Travion, is in a walking boot, Travion's jumping up and down in a walking boot, celebrating the success of Mayan Williams. And it goes to show what Ryan Day has created from a culture standpoint. Now, is that culture the toughest culture in the whole world? It's yet to be determined, but this is the opportunity this week to really right that ship and change that narrative, coming out of what happened last year.
Yeah. There's a money quote for you. I'm going to use that in one of my stories this week.
Got it.
By the way, I think a walking boot says, "Do not jump up and down in this while wearing heads on the side."
It's a pogo stick. He's jumping on the good leg.
Hey, last two things. Number one,
Sure.
Flipping the script. Blake Corum had to leave that game last week, clutching his knee. They gave it the little 1-2, 1-2, 1-2 on the sidelines. He went up the tunnel, came back. Jim Harbaugh said it was structurally sound, his knee was, and he could have gone back in. He did go back in for a couple of plays, or at least one play, and then came out and stayed in the second half. And I call that a mixed message because, number one, he clearly left the field in some pain, and but then he could have gone back in, but they decided not. And I'm just going, your season is on the brink. You've got a freshman in there who's nowhere near what Blake Corum was in that play. The other backup running back was sidelined for the game. Or do you have what are your thoughts about just the cat and mouse game that's going to be played this week on who's going to be available at running back for both teams?
Well, the one thing that we do know, especially in a game like this, because it's not the NFL where you have to produce an injury report, so we won't know the full extent of Blake Corum's participation until 11 a.m. on Saturday, right? Yeah. But coming out of this game, I wasn't one of those guys that went, "Yes, Blake Corum's hurt. He's not going to be able to play next week," right? Yeah. Although if it does help us win a football game, fantastic. But I think what happened is Blake Corum was hurt enough not to finish the half. That's why we saw him walking up the tunnel. I think that they wanted to give him a chance, that he probably, along with the doctors, with the fact that nothing was structurally wrong, they wanted to give him a shot to see, in the game, as opposed to just jogging on the sideline or doing little cuts, at 3/4 speed or half speed, to get in the game and take a carry. And I think that he probably felt a little twinge, and the coaches didn't see the same Blake Corum. And then, not in any way, shape, or form, out of arrogance, they just said, we feel like we're talented enough to take care of this football game. And I see your point of, man, we got to go all in to win this, because if we don't win this well, first of all, next week still means a lot. You still win the Big Ten East, you still go to the Big Ten championship game, and most likely, have an opportunity to beat that opponent, and you lose to Illinois. So Michigan drops to 10. So you're playing 2 versus 10. Michigan beats Ohio State, and you're still where you want to be, right? I know you might need a chip or two to fall, but ultimately, I think they approached the game that they could finish the game off. Yeah. I don't think they expected to, win it with a last second field goal, but I thought that they could in time, strategically with McCarthy picking some good spots. And we talked about it earlier. Some of those, for God's sakes, the one PI, on Ronnie Bell down the sideline from the Witherspoon, the good corner from Illinois, it was definitely pass interference. Yes. But you could see that they broke tendency because they did not have Blake Corum, just slightly. Yes. And didn't but survive that game and move on. And what you've done is you didn't force, even though you had to be, all in to win the biggest game of your season, which is this one, you didn't put Blake Corum's knee in any more limbo to, aggravate it or wear it down so much so that he doesn't practice Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday of this week. He gets in, a Thursday practice, which is, uppers, shoulders, helmets, and then a walkthrough on Friday and then a travel day, where he can approach the game as close to 100% as possible. But here's the other caveat that I think if I'm Michigan, and we see it all the time, in the NFL and college football, is, does he take a hit on that knee early in this Ohio State game, and you're without him for the remainder? You've got to have and I'm sure there's a contingency, that Harbaugh and his coaches are creating for this young running back or a pool of guys, getting active reps while Corum, rests throughout the week until he's 100% ready. Because if he gets one little hype, because I think what it was, it just looked like he got nicked and it just hyperextended and buckled just a little bit, just enough to be uncomfortable and not be himself, which, slows everybody down. But you got to have a plan ready for life with Blake Corum and life without. And I think that's the challenge. But I thought ultimately it was, Michigan wanted to survive. Thought they could survive this game without him and not putting that knee in limbo to have him as close to 100% for this coming week.
Hey, real quick on Blake Corum before I ask you the last question. When you've got a guy like that he's turned that bounce to the outside into a lifestyle. You know what I mean? I mean, the ability against Maryland, for example, Maryland's playing them tough as nails in the first half. And all of a sudden, just before halftime, he bounces one outside because the point of attack is jammed. And we were talking about dancing. There's a big difference between dancing and bouncing with a purpose.
Yes.
What do you as a linebacker, if you're Tommy Eichenberg, if you're Steel Chambers, if you're Ronnie Hickman rolling up there or Lathan Ransom, what do you have to keep in mind? Just like with a running quarterback, you've got J.J. McCarthy who can run the ball, and Ohio State's had a little bit of trouble this year, every now and then with dealing with a quarterback who can run. They had that problem on Saturday at Maryland with Talia Tagovailoa. He had a couple of three or four big time runs in that game. So what do you have to keep in mind you're going against this team that wants to run it down your throat, but they've got this other element of the quarterback either running or a running back that has been quite effective on bouncing outside. How does that slow you down, or what does that do to a defense?
Well, I think it goes back to the point that I talked about on what I'm, antsy to kind of see on Jim Knowles' approach, because, you can't. Because here's the thing, if you start to compensate, because I was saying, how do you cap it? You cap it with a hard edge, right? That means, someone's out there with contain, with their outside arm free, capping it, turning that ball, turning that ball back in, right?
Yeah.
But then you ask, what's the fastest way between 2 points is a straight line, So then because it's all, they run pullers, so it has a power scheme aspect to their offense, but yet everything becomes, especially when you talk about quarterback keeping it, then there's the zone aspect to it too. So what they're looking for is what Corum does. They bring pullers. They're basically waiting for a defender to get undisciplined and just peek inside, and then the tight end captures that edge, and Corum feels that and just keeps bouncing it to the edge. So bounces is the appropriate as opposed to dancing. But then again, if that color, say Ransom, whoever shows up outside, then Corum's eyes go inside. He goes, I can't go outside. I have to go inside. And then again, like I said, with Dallin Hayden, you just pour it in sometimes if every gap's taken. But then you're looking for a defensive tackle to get a little nosy and try to backdoor. Yeah. And then that offensive lineman, blocks him back. You get someone up on the backer, and there goes your seam. And you go, Corum just puts his foot in the ground and gets vertical, which is and that's actually harder on a defense, when the ball goes north and south, because you want a bubbling aspect to the run, because eventually your support, whether it's corner support or safety support, or you use the sideline as your friend, you string that thing out, as long as you can to get that ball to the sideline. And then he has he has to turn that ball back to you. Somehow he's just going to run out of bounds. So, it's a challenge. And I think that's why, I'm very interested to see what Knowles, not only the scheme looks like, but I think the personnel, because if they think they're going to have safeties come up and tackle Blake Corum consistently, and he's going to go down with one tackler in space, sadly mistaken. He's like he's kind of like Maurice Jones-Drew, if you remember him from UCLA, played for the Jags all those years. 5'8", 230 pounds. 60% of his weight is in his lower half. And he's got speed and he's got power. And then, so I think,
and he's tough. Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah,
and again, you're not, especially as a running back, you're not in the Heisman, conversation.
Consideration.
If you're not doing it week in, week out, and we probably gave them a pass because of opponents, early in the season, but then when you just keep doing it week after week, and it's like, 26 carries, $150, 3 touchdowns every single week. That's the personality of their head coach. That's a real identity, right? And now the challenge is for us in year one with Jim Knowles to understand that identity and then impose our identity, and really that whole, mano a mano, fight that we're all looking forward to happens.
Okay. We're recording this early in the week. Who wins this game and why? It's really easy to sit here early in the week and think you know what's going to happen. I mean, I didn't know that game at Maryland was going to happen. Maryland hit a couple of 3 big plays like you talked about, which flipped it. You know, like you just pointed out a while ago, man, the game, when they're good games, the game always turns on 2 or 3 big plays. I mean, they always do. And because you're just tight as a drum. You don't want to give up this. You don't want to give up that. And then suddenly something cracks, right? But who wins this game and why, in your opinion, Matt?
I'm going to say the game will be close as we all want it to be close. And I think, again, a couple of those plays that you talked about, I think Ohio State wins this game. And I believe with those 3 running backs, you would hope getting that offensive line, healthy and cohesive, even at this juncture in the season, and motivated. We must run the football in some cases. And I'm not talking just eventually. We've got to come out and be able to run the football, because I think that things can tip in Michigan's favor because of the ball control type of personality they have. If Stroud has to drop back, so I think Ohio State's winning this because I'm not confident in CJ Stroud having to drop back and throw the football 40 times. 2 great wide receivers. There's going to be 2 opportunities. I think Michigan will, probably has looks or understanding the way in which we will block from an offensive line standpoint or our backs, and they will use that as an advantage to just get hits on Stroud, which will get him frustrated. And I think lastly, and it goes back to maybe one of our other conversations a couple of weeks ago is, and I'm going to go back to the Iowa game, is Iowa put out a template against us to just eye down the quarterback. We're not going to play you one-on-one because we don't have talent that can play you one-on-one. Igukpa, Marvin Harrison, Julian Fleming, Cade Stover, all these guys. So we're not even going to attempt it. We're going to have eyes on the quarterback. We're going to read routes. We're going to read the quarterback, and we're going to and then we're going to let our guys up front eat. And Michigan's talent will be better than Iowa's. And I think it will frustrate CJ Stroud. But I think ultimately we have to have a bend but not break mentality up front on defense, and not let Corum hit the big run. So if Corum, his longest rush of the day is 15 yards or less, we've done our job. And then really, and I think this is where the game benefits us, is even though we've been a little inconsistent, I like our defensive backfield more than I like Michigan's skill at wide receiver. And I like our ability, especially with JTT and Sawyer, and some of our looks and our ability to get some free rushers or our rushers pop free to get hits on McCarthy and force him the same way we don't have Stroud have to throw us to victory. We want to force McCarthy to throw them to victory, because that is, to me, although he does well, and Harbaugh can talk him up the whole week like he's God's gift to quarterback play. He's not the most talented guy in the world. He's a good athlete, but he's just a guy. He's another typical Michigan quarterback, and we've got under their skin, and we've frustrated all those guys for many years. So I think it's going to be, and I do believe it's not going to be some low scoring thing either. I think this is going to be a 34-31, 35-31 type of football game but it's going to come down to, for Ohio State, and again, it's going to come down to us having to get sometime inside 4 minutes in the fourth quarter. We have to go get 1 first down, which forces them to take a series of timeouts to potentially get the ball back. We have to go get that first down, go get 10 yards, most likely running the football. And you can't get overly creative either. So you can't really, outthink yourself. It's got to be big on big, good on good, and go get 10 yards to basically get that first down, have them now out of timeouts. And then, just like our game in 2002, we punt the ball, back to Michigan, inside their 20-25 yard line, and they're operating with, a minute and some change with no timeout. So they have to work the sidelines. They can't really work the middle of the field. And we can just slough off and force them to have to go the full length of the field and score a touchdown to beat us.
Yeah. But as I remind people, Will Allen made that interception at the end at the goal line, man. Michigan was throwing to the end zone there. And and it like you said, you got to make plays, man, when they present themselves. You can't have an interception go through your hands. Yeah, from a defensive standpoint, you can't let, like you just said, Blake Corum he gets 10 yards on a play or 15 on a play, okay, but 70, 65, you can't
Correct.
give up that kind of play. And then offensively, I really think the difference, I think Ohio State feels pretty good about its run game now. Maybe not where any coach would. I don't think any coach is ever totally satisfied. But the difference in this game is C.J. Stroud and those receivers and Cade Stover. I think Cade Stover is that guy that
he's a big X factor for us.
yes,
He's
an
been
X
the whole
factor.
year.
Yeah, who can sneak out and all of a sudden he gets that ball out in the right flat and he goes. That's what Ohio State has going for it that Michigan doesn't, in my opinion. And that should end up being the difference in the game. But of course, Matt, as you pointed out, with this season, ever since last year, ever since getting your toughness questioned, this game's sticking you in your craw, 11-2, and that's not good enough. Even winning a Rose Bowl, 3rd and 1, 4th and 1, you know it's going to come down to that. I mean, just the way this season has gone, that's when you got to prove yourself. And did you fix things from last year, right? Are you tougher? And I'm talking about 3rd and 1 or 4th and 1 from a defensive standpoint also, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to put a bow on this whole thing is, defensive backs are taught to have a short memory, right? Give up a pass, give up a catch, give up a bomb, and have to line up the next play. And I think that's the one thing I would also say, having played in this game 4 times, is, and other big games in my career, is your ability to manage emotions of this game and not go, oh, I just had a mental error. Oh, I just missed a tackle. Well, my teammates and our university and our program needs me to step up and make the next play.
Yeah.
Because I can't change the past.
Yeah.
And I think, whatever team can manage that and manage the highs and lows and the momentum of the game will likely win it as well.
Yeah. Forget about the past. And that includes forgetting about the game last year. I mean, you're either ready or you're not. A memory of last year can get you going, but, fourth quarter, it's got to be, what have you done now? What have you done for me lately? And did you put in the work in the offseason? Yes, you did. You know that, right? It's a confidence factor going all the way back, not just what happened 5 minutes ago. And it's going to be interesting. Hey, man, I appreciate it. As you know,
my pleasure.
We're going to hook up again, in the Christmas season, so to speak, even though people are putting their lights up already. Bottom line is, I just got a feeling for this game too. I think Ohio State prevails. I'll get into my picks later in the week, but I just think Ohio State is better defensively than it was a year ago. And I think it's more wide-ranging offensively, can throw a lot more at you. And then number 3, they've gone into the fourth quarter several times this year with games on the line and won those games. I think that's as much about toughness as anything else. You agree?
I would agree. And I think that, we've, it hasn't always been pretty. It hasn't been the blowout that so many fans, think they should get each and every week. But that's not what it's about. It's why you play the games. And I think in many cases, we are, even with that big loss last year, we are battle tested. We're battle tested and survived. And I think we've won many different ways, as well. And it's a different guy stepping up each and every week, not just the reliant on that run game. Like Michigan might be. And that's, I think, where, talent across the board gives us the advantage.
Ladies and gentlemen, Matt Wilhelm. Matt, happy Thanksgiving, man. Don't eat too much turkey.
Same to you, brother. I will not. I'm watching my figure.
Yeah, Bill, I always enjoy my conversations with Matt. I mean, he kind of lays it out there, and sometimes in great detail, about what you're dealing with on the field, about the emotions you feel in a game, about how little mistakes add up to big time turns in the game when two teams appear to be evenly matched. It just kind of got your juices flowing a little bit more for this game, right?
Oh, absolutely. And obviously, like you said, part of that turnaround in this series and all of these home victories that Ohio State has had since, I was just thinking about it, like even in 2002, it comes down to the last pass, like in the end zone. And who picked that pass off? I always forget.
Will Allen.
Will Allen, that's the one. Well,
Yeah.
How could I forget that? I was thinking about that today, literally. Like, I know they picked the pass off. Now, who did that? And there you go. Another year where you remember the signature play by the signature player. So it sets the table with what should be a remarkable game. I was talking to Jake Butt from the Big Ten Network, and like I said, he just continually there are a couple things that work here. Not just that they're built to beat each other, but it's a legacy game for Ryan Day. It's a huge game for Ryan Day.
Yes.
Hasn't had a coach with a losing record against Michigan in a very long time. And it's easy to pile another loss on Jim Harbaugh too. I mean, 1-6.
Yeah. Yeah.
That'd be hard to live with if you're in Ann Arbor for all the money he's getting paid.
Yeah. But you're right about the player seeing. I mean, Curtis Samuel in 2016, remember the spot? Mm-hmm. And then the next play, they run off the left end there with Curtis Samuel, and nobody touches him, including Jabril Peppers, the defensive player of the year in the Big Ten. And Ohio State wins that game in overtime and moves on to, well, not better things. So he got shut out by Clemson in the college football playoff that year. But the bottom line was, you remember Curtis Samuel traipsing in the end zone with his arms up.
Yep.
And bingo. Hey, one other quick thing before I ask you what I also really want to touch on, which is the national scene. Who do you think has the capability of coming out of nowhere to make that play this year, or to put his signature as you brought it, you brought this up? Who has the potential?
Jack Sawyer from Pickerington, Lathan Ransom, somebody like that on the defensive side. That this defense heard so much, like I said, in the offseason about what happened last year. I think having JT on one edge rusher and, Jack Sawyer and starting to make some plays. One thing that I think could absolutely happen in this game is if Michigan gets in 3rd and 6 and 3rd and 7, and you saw that against Illinois, that Ohio State's not going to sit back. They're coming. And how quickly can they collapse the pocket, get to McCarthy, either force an errant throw or a pick. And I think that's why Jack Sawyer and JT are going to be huge on third downs. I think Ransom, has he blocked a punt the last 2 games? I mean, he's been playing great. And
not since 2019 has Ohio State blocked a punt in 2 straight games. A little bit of a historical fact for you, but one player doing it, and the same player, Xavier Johnson, scooping it. That's
and they blocked one in 18.
That's got to be unprecedented. Yeah. I'm not going to look it up, but
and they blocked one in 8. That's as loud as I've heard Ohio State when they blocked the one in 18 in the blowout, 62-39 blowout. So, I mean, I think those are the guys that could step up. And then on the Michigan side, I mean, they need a receiver to jump out in this game. And I've said this all week, as big as Blake Corum's injury is, and make no mistake, I'm not saying there's another player on this team that's hurt that they need more. I think their passing game has changed a little bit since Luke Schoonmaker went out. The big tight end, Eric Hall's already gone. So Schoonmaker steps in. Now they got a nice tight end in his place, but he's young. I think Schoonmaker's kind of every quarterback has a safety blanket. That's his guy. On those 3rd and 7s when Ohio State's coming, Schoonmaker pops out in the flat. That's the throw. So I think he's a guy to watch to see if he's playing. Is Donovan Edwards playing? Is Travion Henderson playing? It is a long list of guys, and it kind of brings that all full circle that if this is a rematch situation later, I don't know that all these guys would be playing in a game that is a once-in-a-lifetime experience.
Yeah, of this magnitude.
Right.
You and I have talked already. I told you this idea of a 12-team college football playoff where there's a possibility a team would have to win 4 games to win the national championship, 4 of these slobber knocker kind of games, that's going to be such a physical toll on a team that has a chance to make that kind of run. So much so that when they reintroduced this concept, remember, and when it was put forward to us way back when, no one gave any credence to a team running the table. Right. But if you don't get a bye and you're still a really good team 5 through 12, to win the national championship, you got to win 4 big time games in a row. And keep everybody as healthy as possible. That's going to be difficult. Now, with that said, I wanted to ask you this. It's just 4 teams this year. Does the loser of Ohio State, Michigan, if it's a close game, does it have a much better shot today than it did a week ago of being still invited to the big dance, the Final Four, with the way we saw Tennessee bow out unceremoniously?
Well, yeah, that's what I was going to ask Tim. If Ohio State and Michigan weren't looking ahead, then what was Tennessee doing?
Yeah. I don't know
I
what
mean,
Tennessee was
they
doing.
were looking ahead. I will say that. There's no question, because they were looking at something and it wasn't South Carolina's offensive scheme, because the
But the
Gamecocks ruled up 63 on them. So yeah, Tennessee's gone. That was huge for the Ohio State-Michigan loser. That's a huge piece. I think right now we're dealing with a playoff picture that has 7 total teams in it, and really 6, because I think Georgia's going to beat LSU and just knock them out of the way. So you're dealing with, if the loser wants to get in, they need it. If TCU and USC both lose, they're in.
Yeah.
If one loses, it's going to become a really uncomfortable argument with Clemson.
Yeah.
Which I can't believe I'm saying, because I think Michigan and Ohio State are both better than Clemson definitively.
Let me jump in here real quick though. Right now, if you're the college football playoff committee, you've got Ohio State number 2. Let's say flip them this week. I don't see that happening. You got Ohio State number 2, Michigan number 3. They're not playing, a team with 3 or 4 losses. You understand what I'm saying?
Right.
If it's a close game, you still get credit for making it a close game, I would think, in their minds, because they've already identified your team as one of the top 3 teams in the country to this moment. And then the debate is USC. If USC wins out, USC's offense is off the chart. Defensively, it's also off the chart. You know what I mean?
Right.
Are you
Also,
kidding me? This is not a complete football team, And I mean, you can see those kind of arguments or ruminations being made, right? I mean, USC sitting there with 1 loss but can still win the Pac-12. Well, do you take a team that didn't win its conference, didn't even get to the conference championship game, over a team that, by hook or crook, wins its conference? It's going to be an interesting conundrum the next 2 weeks, isn't it?
I think USC's in if they win out, which is bad news for the loser of this game. I do, because they're playing Notre Dame. They'll get some credit for that, and then they'll probably play Oregon in the Pac-12 championship game. They do have an out of this world offense. They have the other Heisman candidate right now. It's C.J. Stroud and Caleb Williams.
Yeah.
He's phenomenal too.
Yes,
Caleb Williams is great. I think he's the best player in college football. I mean, the only other, and hear me on this, I know I think it's interesting to me, because if I was picking Ohio State's best player, I would probably pick Marvin Harrison.
That's what Urban Meyer says, by the way.
But it doesn't take anything away from what CJ's done. CJ's perfectly worthy of a Heisman Trophy too, and that's the thing. We're going to find out Saturday if CJ blows up Michigan and Caleb Williams loses. There you go. So, and Williams has a pretty good receiver too, in Jordan Addison. So he's not bad. Clemson's the one that's going to get annoying though, like I said, because they could be 12-1. Coach Sweeney's going to politic like crazy. And I do think Ohio State has a better chance of losing this game and winning these arguments than Michigan does.
Yeah.
Because Michigan didn't play anybody in their non-conference schedule. They played 3 soft teams. As far as the Big Ten schedule goes, I feel a little bit differently, but they went to Iowa. Iowa's 7-4.
Yeah.
That's not easy. It's not as easy as it looks. Ohio State went to Penn State. That's a good win. They went to Michigan State. At the time, that was a different win than it is now. So I don't have a problem with either team's Big Ten schedule. It's just, I think Ohio State, by virtue of that Notre Dame victory, would have a card that they could play in case they do lose.
And by virtue of Notre Dame's thumping of Clemson,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you would just play that over and over again. Say, we played them too. So, but those are the 6. And, I do think that one of TCU, USC is going to lose. And I think that Clemson will Clemson, South Carolina could be interesting this weekend. It's been a minute since South Carolina challenged them. So if for some reason Ohio State loses, you need to root for Notre Dame and you need to root for South Carolina.
Yeah. Because if USC wins out, it also will have beaten Notre Dame. And so there goes that little trump card for Ohio State. But it's going to be crazy, man. Let's just, it's like Mark Martin, former NASCAR driver, said, man, I remember back in the day, before we came up with this playoff idea in the NASCAR, winning a race was a big deal.
Right.
But now it's like, not only did you win the race, but how many points did you get? Did you get these bonus points for these first two, phases of the
Right.
race and stuff? And he just goes, man, winning the race. And this is what this is. This is what this is about this week, man. This is 2 versus 3. This is undefeated against undefeated for what? I think the 6th or maybe 7th time ever in this storied series, Ohio State versus Michigan. It is just something to really sink your teeth into and enjoy, right?
Oh, I mean, absolutely. It's the 12th time they've both been in the top 5 when they played. And, as anybody that's been around, I think I was alive for about half of them. It does remind me a little bit of the late 90s when these games were just, and I wasn't alive during the 10-year war. I've heard it like bedtime stories my whole life and how insane these games were. But for me, it's more comparable to the late 90s when you go, 96, 97, 98, huge games every year. And the fact that they're both right at the same time, it is good for the Big Ten. It's good for Fox. It's good for the Big Ten. It's good for, Jim Harbaugh and Ryan Day for sure. And I just think Ohio State has the advantage in this one. I do. I think at home, I'll believe it when I see a mission. But here's one other thing, Tim.
Right, you're debating. Those little voices in your head are debating each other. Go ahead, man.
Well, if you're going to go into Ohio Stadium and win, your quarterback has to be lights out. And whether it was Anthony Brown last year, it doesn't happen often. I think I've been to like 2 games where Ohio State's lost, where I was in the press box and Baker Mayfield lit them up.
Yeah.
Anthony Brown played well for Oregon last year. You go back to their last Big Ten loss at home, that was a little bit different. It was a backup quarterback with a very just kind of fluky win, honestly.
Michigan Storm State rolled in and Ohio State's dream rolled out. Yeah.
Michigan State wasn't the better team there, though. And I don't know that Michigan's the better team here, but I know they're going to stick with what they believe in rather. And I do think Blake Corum will play. Don't those get tiring, Tim, when we have to talk all week about a guy? Like, is he out of the locker room yet? Does he have a wrap on his knee?
Yeah.
I think he's going to play.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it'll make for, it's why fans should get there early and be there when pregame practice or warm-ups begin, because you're definitely going to have your eye on Blake Corum's knee, Mike Williams' ankle, Trevion Henderson's foot, Dallas Hayden. Is the moment too big for him? I don't believe it is at all. This young man has struck me as pretty focused since he showed up at Ohio State in June. I mean, I'm very impressed by the way he's gone about things. And now he's not going into this thing wide-eyed. Well, you always are wide-eyed a little bit when it's 2 versus 3 and they're both undefeated. You could be playing this, in Dubuque, Iowa. That's right, Dubuque, Iowa, right? You can play this in Dubuque, Iowa, and the tension would be there. But at home, I just like the way Dallas Hayden has handled himself, man, taking care of business when called upon. And if he can make something special happen, he will. But he's going to give you his all from one play to the next, and he's going to go to the point of attack, And that's what Trevion was not doing on Saturday. And there are all kinds of reasons why the switch to Dallas Hayden made a lot of sense. But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself here. I'm with you. It's really cool because you don't know who's going to step up and make that play like you brought up a couple of times today, and I reiterated. And I'm just curious on Saturday who does that. I'm not even going to make a forecast on that. There will be chances for JT Tuimoloau or a Jack Sawyer or a Zach Harrison. Zach Harrison is playing extremely well right now for them possibly to make that big play against JJ McCarthy. You know what I mean? Which could really swing the game. Or Denzel Burke finally get an interception, or right on down the line. There are all these things that stories yet to be written. But these two teams in their own way don't mirror each other at all, but they are both worthy of being here, right?
Well, yeah, that, and that story I referenced that we had at Sporting News, when I talked to Coach Tressel, he hit it on the emotions of this game for the fan bases are huge. For guys like us, we don't get to cover games like this every day. So you can I always tell people, when you go to that game and it's like this, you can feel it. Like you can literally feel it in the air. You get the chills and you're like, oh my gosh, this environment is set for something special. I haven't felt like that around this game. Even last year, I didn't feel quite the same. 16, I did, because it was the first time that I was like, okay, these two were pretty even. Playoff is on the line. It's going to be huge. There's something about it when it's at Ohio Stadium like this that it just feels a little bit different. I'll say it. And but Jim Tressel was saying who controls their emotions. So again, 18 to 22-year-olds, huge spot for both teams. You hear Ryan Day talk all the time about, I believe the saying is, I use it with my youth basketball teams, that you control your emotions. Don't let your emotions control you. I've heard how many times I've heard Coach Day say that. None bigger than this game where the emotions come into play, where you got to play with them and feel it, but not let it dictate what happens in the game. And talking to Coach Dressel was okay at managing those emotions in this game.
Yeah. It's like the US Open golf. You may be just fired up that day, but man, if you don't take care of business, if you don't stay within your game, if you don't stay within your swing plane, et cetera, and just try to do something extraordinarily extra to hit that ball farther, we all know big time slice, big time pull. You know what I'm saying? I mean, all major sports in big time moments have the same thing. Play your game, stay within the framework of what you're expected to do. And if you get that one chance or three chances to excel, go for it. Don't be hesitant. And it's hard, like you said, to get 22, 18 to 22-year-olds on that same wavelength. Hey, Bill Bender, it's always a pleasure. You know that. You and I are on the same wavelength. What do you think?
Always. And I can't wait to sit next to you, or probably not next to you in the press box, but I'll be in the neighborhood too. I'm looking forward to getting there, and appreciate all you do for me over here at Sporting News. Love talking to Ohio State, Michigan, and we'll definitely have to do it again as we get into the college football playoff. Maybe we'll still be talking about both.
Absolutely. Hey, real quick, I forgot to get your pick. Who do you like Saturday? Yeah. Who do you like Saturday? But then number two, who do you think the winner Saturday is going to play in the Big Ten championship game the next week in Lucas Oil Stadium in Indianapolis?
Well, I don't have a dart for that one. So, I mean, I think it'll be Iowa, right? Iowa controls their destiny.
Isn't that crazy?
So, I think it was 5 weeks ago, we made countless jokes about Ohio State beating Iowa 54-10 and whether or not the Hawkeyes should punt on first down every time. They've found something offensively enough to make it interesting, and they do have a good defense around. I think Jack Campbell's one of the best players in the country as well.
Yes.
Got Ohio State winning by 10. I think I put 36-26. You go 35-25 if you want. That spreads right around. When that spreads right around 9, I figure they know what's going on there. It's not going to be comfortable at times, but like I said, when you have a team, unless it gets really rainy, is that what the weather is? Rain?
No, rain. If there's rain right now, the forecast is it would be in the morning time, but it's going to move out. Rain wise.
I think Ohio State at home just makes one or two more plays, and they really press McCarthy. I think McCarthy plays well, but those guys you mentioned, Tuimoloau, say it for me. Tuimoloau.
Yeah.
Tuimoloau. Yeah. Got it. Finally. Took 3 tries. But one of those guys makes the big sack or the big pick, and it turns the momentum. And I think Ohio State plays ahead by about 7 to 10 points for most of the game. And they emerge, they go play Iowa, and the debate comes now. And then that becomes the debate, Tim, because is 10 points close? What does that 10-point game look like?
Yeah.
I still think Michigan has a shot to backdoor in, even if they lose, but it'll depend on how they look.
Yeah. Yeah. It would have to be something like 2 and 4, obviously, because you don't want those two teams playing in the semifinals, just like the committee didn't want Alabama and Georgia meeting again before the championship game. Hey, real quick before we go, isn't it funny, like you said, how people felt about Iowa, especially after the game here, 54-10, when Ohio State puts a knot on their head, and boy, the furor about the Iowa offense. Brian Ferentz, son of Kirk Ferentz, the head coach, blah, blah, blah. And that, you talk about wow, I told you so kind of moment for Kirk Ferentz. And then Brian Kelly, remember the reporter that had that smart aleck remark about she was late? I think it was a young lady was late for the press conference. And Brian Kelly jokingly said, for the most part, there'll be a fine of whatever, and we'll have a party at my house with all the benefits. And she had a smart aleck remark back to him. I wonder who feels more stupid, Well, those guys are playing for the SEC championship. That's nuts.
Yep. And, obviously we live in that Twitter world of react to everything now. It's one of those things where you got to let it play out, especially with a coach like Brian Kelly. You got to let it play out.
Yeah.
I don't think they'll beat Georgia, but they'll have a chance. And then Iowa, same deal. I mean, for all the uncertainty on that side, their defense keeps them in games. Their defense actually played well against Ohio State, as crazy as that sounds, in a 54-10 loss.
Hey, Nate Baird from Cleveland.com had a great comment. We were sitting there waiting for Ryan Day to come in for the press conference after that game, and he goes, am I crazy? He goes, but I'm more impressed with Iowa's defense now than I was going into the game. I mean, it's really funny. You know what I mean? How things work sometimes, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. And I mean, they got Campbell at the center of that. He's, I was talking to one of my buddies, and he said, I played high school football with one of my buddies. He said that Iowa linebacker was crushing people, and they were losing by 20 or 30. Yeah. And that's how you know that dude's a baller. So can't take anything for granted. Tennessee found that out. I think looking forward to these last 2 weeks. I do think when it's all said and done, Tim, we're going to end up with Georgia, Ohio State, TCU. I think they get through, and I think it'll either be USC or Michigan, and it'll really hinge on that USC Oregon game on Friday night. That if they lose, I think that will be the back door that creaks open just enough for the Wolverines to get in as that 4 spot.
I agree. Well, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, college football fans of all ages and around the world, Bill Bender and Tim May, we're wrapping up this podcast. We could go on forever because Bill and I both like to talk football, and but Ohio State, Michigan, undefeated, hasn't happened very often. The game of the century too, right, Bill? Because the 2006 was the game of the century one. It's funny how those get designated. Be careful labeling something, because something better may come along, right?
Exactly. It's the game of the decade for now.
The game of the decade. There you go. But the decade's early too, But anyway, thanks for joining me again, Bill Bender.
Hey, thank you.
And until next week, ladies and gentlemen, we'll see you then.